Welcome back. On our previous episode, we talked about the importance of not looking for perfection in other people, but instead that we might expect the best in them. So on today's episode, we're going to take one more practical step on things that we can do to be more like Jesus, to create that Zionic condition that we've been talking about, and that is settle our indifferences, our contentions, and don't let them get cold. Have you ever been offended by somebody and you tried to address it, and when you did, you got some kind of response like this? Well, that's just that person. You know, that's just who they are. They just do those things. If you've been in a situation like that, then you kind of know what I'm talking about today, because that's an issue. One that can cause tremendous problems in the church. And so, when I look at the scriptures, I see that there are so many examples of contention or some type of conflict. And even in the Gospels, when you're looking at Jesus and the apostles, that they also had contentions at times, fights amongst themselves. And perhaps the most well-known one, or one that comes to my mind at least, is, who is the greatest among us? And that still seems to be a question that we have today that we haven't figured out. Who has the most authority? Whose doctrine is the most correct? Who is the most right? These are the same things that they dealt with. But unlike us, the apostles actually allowed Jesus to speak into their situation and bring correction and to even resolve the conflict. And so in these instances, Jesus didn't ignore the problem. He didn't try to just brush it under the rug in order to keep the peace, but instead he actually moved to resolve the conflict through teaching and correction. And sometimes he would even use parables. One time he grabbed a child, and used the child as an example in order to open their eyes to the condition that they were in, the condition of their heart, and even to help change their way of thinking. Because Jesus knew that if he were to ignore an issue, that wouldn't lead to peace. Instead, it would lead to bitterness and even resentment. And this is something that is fraught in the church today. And if it isn't dealt with, it can be a fissure in the body of Christ, because the longer we don't address an issue, if you think of a wound, if you ignore a wound, the longer you ignore it, the more it gets infected, and it will cause problems for generations. If we are carrying around this unspoken offense, it starts to corrupt the way that we see our fellow brothers and sisters. It corrupts the way we see everything. For a simple example, I remember early on in our marriage, Jane and I, we were counseled that you don't keep score, and of course we hear that and we think, we got it. We won't do that. Well, day one, we were doing that. And when I say we, it was me. I remember coming home from work, after our honeymoon, and our ways of doing house and the way we do it and what we expect to be done or not be done or whatever is different. And I remember coming home one day and there was something that I thought should have been done this way, and it wasn't done my way. And so, I'm getting upset internally. And so I just started doing those things. I started doing it my way. And as I'm doing it, I'm just like, making all these tally marks of 1 for Andrew, 0 for Jane, like I'm so much better than her. And, thankfully, Jane and I both knew that we have a propensity to withdraw instead of address issues. And knowing that we had that problem, we decided early on that we would not let things just fester, that instead we would actually communicate. That's a novel concept. And thankfully we did, because, something like that, you might think, well, that's nothing, or you might even laugh at that. But if it goes unaddressed, then years down the road, that it starts to create within us this just resentment toward each other. And so somewhere down the line, somewhere is going to break. And it won't even have anything to do with what happened in that moment, but it's something that actually happened many years ago that we never actually addressed. And so settling injustices is incredibly, incredibly necessary for us. How many people in the church have been repeatedly hurt and our leaders stay silent? We can't worship in that way. True worship happens when our hearts are clean toward one another. And God has given us not a suggestion, but a divine command that we reconcile with our brothers and our sisters. And we have clearly in Matthew 18 that if someone has offended you, that you are first to go to them alone. And then if that doesn't work, then you bring a witness. And if that doesn't work, then you might go to a teacher or an elder. And all this in love and humility with the single desire to actually restore that relationship so that we're not gossiping and we're not withdrawing, but we're actually resolving the issues at hand. Zion is not a conflict-free zone as much as we might like it to be. It's simply not. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that Zion is not the absence of conflict. It's the triumph over conflict. It's a people who can work through their struggles. We're still going to be people. We're still going to have personalities that just by their very nature have friction with other people, with other personalities. Just for example, and maybe this is silly, but I think people can relate because you're either one or you're the other. Take an introvert and an extrovert. And I feel like I'm a little bit of both at times, and I know some people say you can't be in the middle, and others say you can, so whatever. I feel like I'm a little bit of both, but I lean more introverted. But so in my introverted side, when I'm talking to people, sometimes some people they'll suck your life away, and you just inside you need to take a break, and you yearn to be able to say, can you pause? Can you let me talk? Or let's just be silent for a while and have our own thoughts, But no, we can't say that. We have to be polite and righteous. And so we just stuff it and we say nothing, right? And then all of a sudden we start to really dislike this person. And in fact, we might even avoid them. And then take it from the extrovert side. So, and I can be a little extroverted at times. Say you're coming and you're wanting to get to know someone. You're wanting to establish a relationship or just say hi. And you feel like they're kind of standoffish to you. And you start thinking, what thorn is in their side? Why aren't they being more friendly and loving? I'm just trying to get to know them, and they're not even giving me a smile, And for either one, the introvert or the extrovert, sometimes what we end up doing is we'll go tell other people. We won't actually talk to the person because we have to stuff it. We have to stuff it in the moment. But when we're with other people, that person over there, gosh, they won't stop talking. They're so horrible, or that person, they don't seem to be very loving and open. And now we're spreading this bitterness and it's infecting other people. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just say in the moment with love that we could actually be secure in God's love and that we could be secure in our covenant? That just like in a marriage, there's a security there because you have the covenant. That when things are difficult, you can actually say something and you can say, hey, as the introvert, can we take a break for a moment? I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. Or from the extrovert standpoint, I'm feeling unheard and unseen. What's going on here? And wouldn't that be wonderful? A place where we can actually settle conflicts, because Zion is built through reconciliation. So, in conclusion, can we just, instead of just preaching patience, can we be brave and actually speak and share what's going on, not pretending like we're not offended? And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying every little offense we should be bringing up, because then we'd have a whole nother problem. But I find it amusing. It's amusing, but it's not amusing if you get me, that we ignore mountains, big problems we tend to ignore, but these little molehills will blow those up into mountains. Let's stop doing that. Let's address the problem. Don't let it be cold. Don't let it get cold. Instead, let us be like Christ, that we're firm in truth, that we're rich in mercy, and that we are full of humility. Then we can have Zion.